The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. The Amazing Discovery. My name is Edward Malone, and I'm here to tell you my amazing story. The adventure began when I fell in love with Gladys Hungerton. I hoped that Gladys would be my wife, but when I asked her to marry me, she turned me down. She said she could only marry someone who was a brave and famous hero. I would never be good enough to be her husband, she said, as I was only a newspaper reporter. I was determined to prove her wrong. The bravest thing I could think to do was to go and visit Professor Challenger. He was one of the cleverest men in Britain and knew all there was to know about animals. He also had a terrible temper. He was violent, dangerous, and he hated reporters. Back in 1909, he'd gone to South America on an expedition and was away for 2 years. There'd been a big fuss when he got back, and now he refused to answer any more questions about what he'd seen there. Only the other week, a reporter from the Telegraph had tried to talk to him, and Challenger had hit him over the head with an umbrella. The poor man was still in hospital. I had an idea. I wrote to the professor, pretending to be a young student of zoology at the university. I said I thought Challenger was the greatest scientist in the whole world. I also said that I'd just read something he'd written about Charles Darwin, and that there were 1 or 2 things I didn't understand. I asked if I could come to his house to talk about it with him. He wrote a letter back to me. It said he didn't care if I admired him or not. He already knew he was a genius and didn't need some pipsqueak like me telling him so. He also said that his essay on Darwin was perfectly clear, and if I didn't understand it, I must be a complete nincompoop. However, he did agree to see me at 11 o'clock on Wednesday. So, there I was on Wednesday morning, knocking on the professor's front door. It was opened by a miserable-looking butler who led me to Challenger's study. The butler tapped on the study door. There came a bellow from inside, like the noise of an angry bull. I thought the professor was saying, "Come in, blast you!" So I did. Challenger sat behind a big desk. He had an enormous head, a thick neck, and huge shoulders. He not only sounded like a bull, he looked a bit like one too. His face was very red and his hair very black. He had a long beard that covered his chest, and his large hands were also covered with long black hair. His eyes were blue-grey, and they glared out at me from under thick, dark eyebrows. "Oh, so you're the idiot who doesn't understand plain English, are you?" he snarled. "Yes," I said meekly. "You do realize that the cranial index is a constant factor in all such cases, as I discussed, and that the germ plasm is different from the parthenogenetic egg, don't you?" he snorted. "But of course," I agreed. "And what does that prove?" he whispered. "Shall I tell you?" I nodded eagerly. "It proves," he roared, "that you are an imposter. You're a vile, sneaky reporter who knows nothing about science. I was talking gibberish, you fool!" I started backing nervously towards the door, but he was too quick for me. He rushed out from behind his desk. I was surprised to see that he was so short. He only reached my shoulders, but he was very strong. He grabbed hold of me, and we went tumbling out the door together. We must have looked like a giant Catherine wheel going round and round. Along the passageway we went, getting faster and faster. The butler opened the front door, and we somersaulted down the steps and into the street. We landed with a thud in the gutter. "What's going on here?" said a policeman who was walking by. "You ought to be ashamed of yourselves." "This bully attacked me," I said. But then I added, after a pause, though I was partly to blame, as I did try to trick him. The professor looked at me and nodded. The policeman walked on, and the professor invited me back inside the house. "That was good of you to take the blame," he said. "If you promise to hold your tongue and not repeat a word of what I say to you, I'll tell you what happened in South America." I agreed, and Challenger began to tell me his story. While he was travelling along the Amazon River, he said, he stopped at an Indian village. The village chief showed him a drawing book. It had belonged to an American named Maple White, who had died of fever a few weeks before. In the book, Challenger saw some curious pictures. There was one of a high, dark red cliff with a tall pillar of rock beside it. Another was of an extraordinary creature with a head like a bird, a body like a fat lizard, and a long tail covered in spikes. Maple White had drawn a figure of a man next to the monster to show how big it was. It must have been about 4 meters high and 9 meters long. The professor had seen a picture just like this in a book about prehistoric animals. It was a stegosaurus. All the dinosaurs were thought to have died out millions of years ago, but White must have seen one in South America.